Think about this for a second. Imagine walking into a shop tomorrow with no money. You have food at home, you have clothes, you have a bicycle, maybe you even have a few chickens. But you want a loaf of bread. The baker doesn't want your bicycle. He already has chickens. And the farmer who grows your food doesn't need the shoes you're offering. So what do? You could try to find someone who wants exactly what you have, and who happens to possess exactly what you want. But now imagine doing that for every meal, every house, every tool, every journey, every debt, every salary, every tax. Suddenly, trade becomes a search problem. And this is where the strange story of money begins, because money was never really about coins. It was about solving a problem that appeared whenever human beings became too numerous, too specialized, and too connected for simple exchange to work. How do you trade with someone when what you want and what they want are completely different? For thousands of years, humans answered that question in wildly different ways. Grain, cattle, silver. Shells, salt, metal weighed on scales, stamped coins, pieces of paper, bank deposits, and now numbers on a screen. The history of money is therefore not simply the history of currency. It is the history of an idea becoming more and more abstract. And the strangest part is this: the more money changed, the less it looked like something that should have value. So how did humanity get from a handful of grain in an ancient storehouse to the balance displayed on your phone? The answer begins long before anyone invented a coin. Long before money looked like money at all. Picture an ancient settlement in Mesopotamia. There are farmers growing barley, shepherds managing animals, craftsmen making tools, and officials organizing labor. Nobody needs to carry a pocket full of coins because there aren't any. But that does not mean there is no system of exchange. There are records, there are debts, there are quantities. A certain amount of grain can represent an obligation. A worker can be owed a certain quantity of food. A farmer can owe an institution. A merchant can record what has been received and what remains to be paid. This matters because one of the oldest assumptions about the origin of money is also one of the simplest. First came barter. Then people discovered how inconvenient barter was. Then they invented money. It makes a perfect story, but history is more complicated. There is no strong evidence that every early society passed through a pure barter economy before discovering money. In many ancient societies, systems of credit, accounting, redistribution, and obligations existed alongside direct exchange. In other words, the first form of money may not have been something you could hold. It may have been a number, a promise, a recorded obligation. The physical object came later in many places. This changes the question. Instead of asking, what was the first thing humans used as money? We should ask something more interesting. When did humans begin turning value into something that could be measured, transferred, and recognized by people who did not know each other? That is where ancient economies become fascinating. In Mesopotamia, silver could serve as a standard of value even when the silver itself was not shaped into coins. It could be weighed. A transaction might be expressed in units of silver, while the actual payment involved a measured piece of metal. That meant the metal did not need to look special. A ring could be money. A piece of silver could be money. A sheet of metal could be money. What mattered was its weight and accepted value. It was money, but not yet the money we recognize. And other societies found other answers. Across parts of Asia and Africa, cowrie shells became important objects of exchange. Why shells? Because they had several useful properties. They were relatively durable. They could be counted. They were recognizable. They could be carried. And in places where they were difficult to obtain, their scarcity helped make them desirable. In ancient China, cowrie shells became associated so strongly with value that the shape of a cowrie influenced written characters connected with money, wealth, buying, and value. Elsewhere, livestock could represent wealth. In some societies, cattle were not simply animals, they were movable stores of value. A herd could represent status, security, bride wealth, political influence, or the ability to settle a major obligation. This reveals something important about ancient money. Money did not have to be universally useful. It only had to be useful enough within a particular social world. But every form of commodity money had a weakness. Cattle are difficult to divide. Grain can spoil. Salt can be bulky. Shells may not be equally valuable everywhere. And pieces of metal create another problem. If I hand you a lump of silver, how do you know how much it is worth? You weigh it, and now every transaction becomes a miniature laboratory. Bring the scales, check the weight, check the purity, cut the metal if necessary, weigh it again. For a small transaction, that may be manageable. For a large economy, it becomes inconvenient. And this is where one of the most important inventions in money history appears: standardization. Instead of asking every person to weigh the metal every time, what if someone could guarantee that a particular piece of metal contained a known amount of valuable material? Now imagine putting a symbol on it, a mark saying, in effect, "This piece has been checked." You have just taken a huge step toward the coin. The first coins did not appear because humans suddenly became fascinated with round pieces of metal. They appeared because standardization solved a problem. And one of the most important places where this happened was Lydia, in what is now Western Turkey. Around the 7th century BCE, Lydian rulers began producing pieces of precious metal according to standardized weights. These early coins were made from electrum, a naturally occurring mixture of gold and silver. They were not perfectly round. They were not modern coins, but they had something revolutionary: a controlled weight and a mark associated with authority. The metal could now travel with a claim attached to it. The king was no longer simply saying, "This is some valuable metal." He was effectively saying, "This is a recognized unit." That distinction would transform the world. But why did coinage appear in Lydia at all? This is one of the great mysteries in the history of money. There is no single answer that historians can prove beyond doubt. Trade is one possibility. Administration is another. Military payments may have played an important role. And this is where the story becomes particularly interesting. A ruler trying to maintain an army has a problem very similar to the ordinary trader. Soldiers need to be rewarded, but soldiers cannot eat promises. And if a state wants large numbers of people to serve full-time, it needs a reliable way to organize payment. Coinage offered an extraordinary advantage. Instead of distributing piles of metal and forcing everyone to weigh it, a ruler could issue standardized pieces. The state had effectively transformed metal into an instrument of administration. And once coins existed, another possibility appeared. People could use them for things far beyond the purpose for which they were originally created. This is one of the recurring patterns in money history. An invention begins as a solution to one problem. Then society discovers that it can solve 10 others. The Lydian experiment did not remain in Lydia. Coinage spread through the Greek world, but the Greeks did something that would make money even more powerful. They connected currency to identity. A coin could carry the image of a god, a city, a king, an animal, a symbol. The Athenian owl became one of the most recognizable images in the ancient Mediterranean. The coin was not just metal. It was a message. It said who issued it, where it came from, and increasingly what kind of political world you were dealing with. This is a subtle but enormous transformation. Money had become political. A coin could carry the authority of a state farther than its soldiers could march, and Athens discovered another reason to make enormous quantities of coins: silver. Beneath the ground at Laurion lay rich deposits of silver ore. Athens extracted it on an enormous scale. The mines were dangerous, labor-intensive, and dependent heavily on enslaved labor. But the silver they produced could be transformed into coins, and those coins could be transformed into something even more valuable than silver: ships. Athens needed a navy. The Persian Empire was expanding. The survival of the Greek city-states was at stake. So the question became, what should Athens do with its silver wealth? Distribute it among citizens, or turn it into military power? The decision helped reshape history. Silver became ships. Ships became naval power. Naval power helped Athens defeat the Persian invasion. And money became part of the machinery of geopolitics. This is one reason the history of currency cannot be separated from the history of war. Governments need money to raise armies. Armies expand states. States collect taxes. Taxes create demand for standardized payments. Standardized payments encourage currency. And currency makes it easier for governments to mobilize resources at enormous scale. But coins had another revolutionary property: they traveled. A merchant could leave one city carrying coins and arrive somewhere else with something the next person recognized as valuable. The coin no longer depended entirely on the person who originally received it. It could circulate. And as coins circulated, they created something even more important: a shared language of value. A farmer could think about the price of grain. A soldier could think about wages. A merchant could compare goods from different regions. A government could collect taxes. A lender could calculate a debt. Different objects could now be translated into the same numerical language. That may be the most important function money ever acquired. It allowed humans to compare things that otherwise had no natural common denominator: a horse, a house, a meal, a day's labor, a ship, a sack of grain. Money turned all of them into quantities. But metal had a problem. It was heavy. The larger the economy became, the more inconvenient physical money became. Imagine transporting thousands of coins across a long distance. Now imagine paying an army with them. Now imagine storing the wealth of an empire. The solution would come from a place that had already been experimenting with money in a completely different form: China. China's monetary history developed along paths that were not identical to those of the Mediterranean. Bronze objects, including representations of tools and later distinctive coin forms, circulated. Coins were often designed with holes so that they could be strung together. And eventually, something remarkable happened. People began using pieces of paper as money. At first, the idea was not as strange as it sounds. Paper could represent something else. A merchant could deposit valuable goods or coins somewhere secure and receive a document acknowledging the deposit. Instead of transporting the heavy material, the document could change hands. The paper was not valuable because paper itself was valuable. It was valuable because someone trusted the promise behind it. That is the moment money begins to lose its physical identity. And once that happens, there is almost no limit to how abstract money can become. China eventually developed forms of government-issued paper currency. The advantages were obvious. Paper was lighter than metal. Large payments became easier. Long-distance trade became more practical, but paper money revealed a new danger. If a government can create money without digging it out of the ground, what stops it from creating too much? The answer is supposed to be restraint. Because money only works when people believe that the thing they are holding will still be accepted tomorrow. If that belief collapses, the paper does not magically retain its value. This is one of the oldest lessons in the history of currency. Money can be created. Trust cannot simply be printed. The same problem would appear again and again. Centuries later, European banking would push the abstraction even further. Gold was valuable, but storing it was dangerous. So people deposited gold with specialists. Goldsmiths kept the metal secure and issued receipts. At first, the receipt was simply evidence that gold existed somewhere else. But then people realized something. If the receipt itself could be passed to another person, why bother retrieving the gold? The paper was easier to carry, and now the receipt had begun to function as money. This was a profound change. The person holding the paper did not necessarily possess the gold. They possessed a claim on the gold. Money had become a promise, and banks took that idea one step further. Suppose a bank holds deposits. It does not necessarily leave every coin sitting untouched in a vault. It can make loans. A borrower receives purchasing power. That purchasing power enters the economy. Someone else receives it as payment. It is deposited again. The banking system becomes a network of promises and claims. Eventually, much of what we call money no longer exists as physical cash at all. It exists as entries in accounts. And this is where the story of money takes a strange turn. For thousands of years, people had been trying to make value easier to move. First, they moved the object. Then they standardized the object. Then they represented the object with paper. Then banks represented the paper with accounts. And eventually, the object disappeared almost completely. But there was still one question. What exactly gives modern money its value? For much of modern history, people could point to gold. A banknote might represent a claim on a quantity of precious metal. That gave the system a physical anchor. But gold created its own limitations. The amount of money could become constrained by the supply of gold. Economic activity could grow faster than the amount of gold available. Governments also wanted flexibility during wars and financial crises. Eventually, many countries abandoned the direct link between their currencies and gold. The final major transformation came when modern fiat money became the norm. Fiat money is not valuable because the paper itself contains a valuable commodity. A banknote is not worth $20 because $20 worth of paper is inside it. It is worth $20 because people accept it as $20. And they accept it because a huge network of institutions, laws, contracts, taxes, banks, businesses, and social expectations all reinforce that value. This sounds fragile. In one sense, it is. But it is also incredibly powerful. Because once money no longer needs to be tied to a physical commodity, the monetary system can adapt to a much larger and more complex economy. Money becomes less like an object and more like infrastructure. You do not think about the electricity grid every time you turn on a light. You do not think about the network of contracts behind a bank transfer every time you tap a card. You simply trust that the system will work. And today, that trust has taken money into its most abstract form yet. Look at your bank balance. You may see a number, perhaps 100, perhaps 10,000, perhaps 1 million. Where is that money? You cannot point to a pile of notes. There may not even be enough physical cash somewhere in the system to represent every digital balance. Modern economies operate largely through bank deposits and electronic transfers. Money can be created through lending, transferred across networks, settled between banks, and recorded in databases without a single banknote changing hands. The strange thing is that this does not make the money imaginary. The number on the screen represents a claim that can buy something real: food, fuel, a house, a plane ticket, a service, human labor. The digital number works because everyone around you agrees to treat it as a claim on real economic resources. And suddenly, the ancient world does not seem so distant. The person who accepted a silver weight thousands of years ago was doing something remarkably similar. They were trusting a system. The difference is that the system has become unimaginably larger. Your bank balance can cross continents in seconds. A merchant can receive payment from someone they have never met. A business can pay thousands of workers without handing any of them a physical object, and money can move without moving. That may sound like a contradiction, but it is the logical conclusion of a process that began when humans first learned to represent value rather than physically exchange the thing that carried it. And then came cryptocurrency. For the first time in centuries, people began seriously asking whether money needed governments and banks at all. Cryptocurrencies attempt to create digital systems in which transactions can be recorded and verified through distributed networks, rather than relying entirely on a central institution. The idea is radical, but the underlying problem is ancient. Who gets to decide what counts as money? Who verifies it? Who controls its supply? Who can create it? Who can transfer it? Who can stop a transaction? These are the same questions rulers, merchants, bankers, and communities have been wrestling with for thousands of years. The technology changes. The problem remains. And that may be the most useful way to understand the entire evolution of money. Money was not invented once. It was reinvented repeatedly. Every time the existing system became inconvenient, expensive, dangerous, or too limited for a growing society, people found another way to represent value. A piece of silver was easier than a sack of grain. A standardized coin was easier than weighing silver. Paper was easier than transporting coins. A bank deposit was easier than transporting paper. A digital payment is easier than transporting anything at all. The physical object keeps disappearing. The information keeps becoming more important. And yet, there is a strange limit to how far abstraction can go. No matter how digital money becomes, it still eventually has to connect back to the physical world. A number on your phone cannot feed you. It cannot build a house. It cannot grow wheat. It cannot produce electricity. It cannot manufacture a shirt. It only gives you access to the goods and services produced by other human beings. That is why money is so powerful. It is a bridge between human effort. The farmer produces food. The engineer produces machines. The driver transports goods. The teacher provides knowledge. The programmer builds software. The doctor provides care. Money allows all of those different forms of work to be compared, transferred, stored, and exchanged across time and distance. It is a translation system for human cooperation. And perhaps that is why the history of money is really the history of trust. A shell only works if people agree that the shell can be exchanged. A silver coin works because people recognize its weight, its issuer, and its acceptability. A banknote works because people trust that others will accept it. A bank deposit works because people trust the banking system. A digital payment works because millions of computers, institutions, laws, and people cooperate to maintain the same monetary system. The physical form keeps changing. The agreement underneath it remains. So think back to that shop at the beginning. You walk in without money. You have food, clothes, tools, perhaps a bicycle. The baker does not want your bicycle. He does not want your chickens. He simply wants something he knows he can use. Money solves the problem by giving you something else to offer. Not because that thing is inherently useful, but because everyone else agrees that it represents value. That is the strange invention. Humans created something that could stand between almost every other thing. Something that could turn labor into a number into a claim into a purchase into food, and food back into the energy required for another human being to work. For thousands of years, we kept changing the object. Shells became metal, metal became coins, coins became paper, paper became bank deposits became digital entries, And now we are experimenting with forms of money that may exist almost entirely as information. But underneath every version is the same ancient question. Can you trust that what you have today will still be accepted when you need something tomorrow? That is why the history of money is stranger than the history of coins. It is the history of humanity learning to trust something that does not have to be what it claims to be. A shell does not contain the value it represents. A coin may contain less valuable metal than its face value suggests. A banknote is mostly paper. A bank deposit is an accounting entry. A digital currency may be nothing more than information distributed across computers. And yet, each can become powerful enough to determine what people eat, where they live, what they build, what wars governments can fight, and what futures entire societies can afford. Money began as a solution to the difficulty of exchange, but over time it became something much bigger. It became a language, a memory, a promise, a measurement, a source of power. And perhaps most importantly, a shared agreement between strangers. So the next time you look at a coin in your hand, a note in your wallet, or a balance glowing on your phone, remember what you are actually looking at. Not wealth itself, not food, not a house, not human labor. You are looking at a symbol of permission, a token that says you can claim a portion of what other people have produced. Thousands of years ago, that token might have been a piece of silver weighed on a balance. Today, it may be nothing more than a number on a screen. The object changed. The problem did not. And neither did the strange human idea at the center of it all, that we can trade almost anything with almost anyone, anywhere in the world, simply because we agree that a symbol has value. And perhaps that is the real history of money. Not the story of what humans used to pay, the story of how humans learned to make value portable. And then, little by little, learned that it did not need to be portable at all. And if you enjoy discovering the hidden stories behind the ordinary things that surround us every day, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Exhibit A, Everyday Objects, and join us as we uncover the history hiding in plain sight. Because the next ordinary object you pick up might have a much stranger story than you think.